Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah, glad to be here. We have a seriously wild one today.
We really do. Today, we are looking at a text that makes a very bold, highly controversial, and deeply fascinating claim about the foundational structure of human civilization.
Right.
But before we get into the weeds, take a quick second right now to like and subscribe to the platform you're listening on.
It really helps us out.
Yeah, it does. And you are going to want to track with us for this entire conversation because today we were taking a comprehensive, critical look at the 2025 ebook Imago Mater.
The Eternal Image of Motherhood in Nature and Faith by Conrad Riker.
Exactly. Consider this a concentrated exploration into the biological, historical, and spiritual bedrock of society.
It is a massive read.
Oh, absolutely. And I highly recommend you check out Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy a copy for yourself.
It's definitely worth picking up.
And also make sure you follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for more of his writing.
Yeah, because the scope of this book is, well, it's undeniably ambitious.
It really is.
I mean, it synthesizes an enormous amount of data across seemingly disconnected disciplines. You have evolutionary biology, neurochemistry, ancient mythology.
Even some quantum-adjacent physics theories in there.
Right. All to construct a very specific worldview regarding human nature and, honestly, societal collapse.
Yeah. And I want to pause here just to address you, the listener, directly to establish some context for today.
That's a good idea.
Because we know that many of you tuning in today are navigating the complexities of the modern world. And specifically, a lot of you are coming from the manosphere or men's rights spaces.
Right. You're actively seeking to understand the history and the deep primal foundation of our institutions.
Exactly. How they were built and how they function today. Now, the author, Conrad Riker, writes for a red-pilled audience and argues that modern institutions have been captured by feminism and cultural Marxism.
Yeah, that is his central thesis.
But as your guides, we aren't here to endorse or take sides on these politically charged viewpoints.
Not at all.
Our mission is to impartially unpack Riker's arguments, fascinating biological case studies, and historical analyses so you can understand the ideas presented in the book and draw your own conclusions.
That analytical distance is crucial. Knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied critically.
Exactly.
So we are going to examine the structural load-bearing walls of his thesis. If you want to understand a political or social philosophy, you have to look at the underlying assumptions it makes about biology and history.
We want to give you the tools to analyze those assumptions thoroughly.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise of the book is that motherhood is absolutely not a social construct.
Yeah.
It is not an arbitrary role assigned by early agrarian societies. Instead, the text argues that it is a primal, cosmic, and biological absolute.
The very mechanism of survival.
Right. And to build this case, the analysis doesn't start with human philosophy. It starts out in the wild.
It begins with evolutionary game theory and the cold logic of maternal instinct.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. The proposition here is that maternal instinct is a mathematically necessary survival strategy, hardwired into mammalian DNA.
We always romanticize nature.
We do, but the book strips all that away. It presents the drive to nurture as a brutal, calculated necessity for the continuation of a species.
So let's look at our closest relatives, the primates.
Yeah, in the dense forests of Uganda, chimpanzee mothers engage in these extensive grooming rituals with their infants.
And we typically frame grooming as just basic hygiene, right? Picking out ticks or dirt.
Exactly. But the behavioral ecology data presented suggests something far more complex. It's actually a form of social currency.
Wait, but isn't a monkey just picking bugs off its kid? I mean, how does a chimpanzee conceptualize social currency?
Well, it's not a conscious financial transaction. It's an innate behavioral strategy that yields a specific social dividend.
Okay.
When a high-ranking mother chimp grooms her infant in plain view of the troop, she is signaling status. She is mapping that infant into the complex hierarchy of the group.
That is wild.
And studies on primate neurobiology show that these extended grooming sessions release endorphins, not just in the infant, but in the observing chimps.
So they associate that specific infant with a calming state.
Exactly. A bonded state within the troop's collective neural network. It literally ensures better access to foraging grounds, physical protection from rival males, and even future mating opportunities.
Wow. And the text also details how chimpanzee mothers deliberately teach their young to use tools, like selecting the exact right density of stone to crack open nuts.
Right, and this isn't just passive observation where the infant mimics the mother.
The mother will actually slow down her movements, correct the infant's grip, and demonstrate the strike repeatedly. It's active pedagogical teaching.
And then there is the phenomenon of allomothering in bonobos, which adds another whole layer to this.
Oh yeah, the book highlights documented instances where female bonobos adopt entirely orphaned infants from different genetic lineages.
Even when those females already have their own biological offspring to care for.
The evolutionary math on that is just fascinating.
Strictly speaking, expending caloric energy on a non-genetic relative seems counterproductive to passing on your own genes.
Right.
But in highly social, interdependent species like bonobos, the survival of the wider group is paramount.
So the drive to nurture is so deeply embedded in the neural architecture that it overrides immediate genetic selfishness.
Exactly. The health of the collective troop ensures the ultimate survival of the individual's direct lineage.
Okay, so moving out of the jungle, the analysis takes us to the African savanna, arguably one of the most unforgiving biomes on Earth.
Well, absolutely.
The statistics presented regarding the lioness are staggering. If lion cubs are left without a mother's presence, say she is killed by a rival male or a hyena pack, their survival rate plummets to under 20%.
Barely any survive.
But with a vigilant mother, that survival rate spikes to over 80%. She acts as an absolute physical barrier against a fiercely hostile environment.
But there is a vital paradox in the behavior of the lioness that is central to the book's thesis on institutional building.
The tough love aspect.
Right, the lioness is violently protective, yes, but she also enforces a brutal timeline for independence.
When the biological clock strikes, she physically forces her cubs out of the immediate safety of her proximity to fend for themselves.
And this isn't maternal failure. It's calculated evolutionary logic.
Right.
Behavioral studies on large felines indicate that cubs pushed to independence at the exact right developmental window are statistically more likely to survive into dominant adulthood.
The mother's sacrifice is fundamentally about preparation.
Yes. And we see a similar, though less aggressive, educational role in elephants.
Data from Amboseli National Park shows that a mother elephant's primary role isn't just lactation, it's the transmission of geographic and social memory.
She teaches the calf the complex social hierarchies of the herd,
The migratory routes to find hidden water tables during droughts.
and how to interpret infrasonic rumbles from miles away.
Now, the section on maternal sacrifice is where the examples become almost incomprehensible to the human risk assessment model.
They really do.
The text describes a 400-pound grizzly bear willingly charging a pack of timber wolves to protect her cubs.
From a pure survival standpoint, the bear should abandon the cubs and save herself to reproduce next season.
But she doesn't calculate those odds. Her biology overrides her self-preservation instinct, and she attacks.
Or take the humpback whale. When a great white shark approaches, the mother whale deliberately maneuvers her massive body between the predator and her calf,
Acting as a literal physical meat shield.
absorbing massive bite damage just to ensure the calf's escape.
But the ultimate illustration of this biological imperative is found in the ocean. The mother octopus represents the absolute extreme of biological martyrdom.
It is brutal.
After laying thousands of eggs, the mother octopus ceases feeding entirely.
She spends months in a dark crevice, dedicating every ounce of her metabolic energy to oxygenating those eggs by blowing currents of water over them.
And fighting off predators. And the physiological breakdown she goes through is horrifying. It's not just starvation.
Precisely. It's a process called rapid senescence. The optic gland in the octopus begins to secrete hormones that literally dismantle her own cellular structure.
She digests her own tissues to maintain the energy required to guard the clutch.
By the time the eggs hatch, she is biologically programmed to die. Her body just shuts down.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how Riker uses these natural examples to argue that self-sacrifice and hierarchy are the bedrock of all successful institutions.
In this view, the natural world demonstrates that systems, whether a pride of lions or a human civilization, survive only when there is a foundational, non-negotiable willingness to sacrifice for the next generation.
And the text posits that any human institution attempting to bypass or deconstruct this primal blueprint is inherently unstable and doomed to eventual collapse.
That is a dense framework to view society through. But to prove that this isn't just behavioral observation, the book zooms in microscopically.
Because all of these actions, the bear charging, the primate grooming, the octopus starving, are driven by a highly specific, biochemical architecture in the brain.
The physical and chemical bond between a mother and her child is essentially an involuntary physiological contract.
And the neurochemistry involved is staggering in its complexity. The text focuses heavily on the endocrine system.
Particularly oxytocin.
Right, colloquially but somewhat inaccurately termed the love hormone.
When a mother holds her newborn, her hypothalamus triggers a massive release of oxytocin.
And this isn't merely to induce a subjective feeling of warmth. It is a profound neurochemical rewiring,
Oxytocin binds to receptors in the amygdala, dampening the fear response.
while simultaneously stimulating the brain's reward centers when interacting with the infant.
The research on prairie voles used to illustrate this is wild. Prairie voles are studied extensively because they exhibit monogamous, highly nurturing behavior, which is pretty rare in rodents.
Exactly. When researchers isolate the specific oxytocin receptors in female prairie voles and chemically block them, the behavioral shift is instantaneous and terrifying.
The female voles completely ignore their young.
The maternal instinct doesn't just diminish, it vanishes. They will walk right over their pups as if they were inanimate objects.
It demonstrates that the maternal drive is a literal chemical switch, dependent on a highly specific molecular key.
And it's not just oxytocin. There is prolactin, the hormone responsible for lactation.
The data shows that mothers with higher baseline prolactin levels exhibit faster neurological reaction times to the sound of their specific baby crying.
And then there is the mechanism of cortisol, the primary stress hormone. A mother's biological state acts as an environmental sensor for the developing infant.
If a mother is in a highly stressful environment, her elevated cortisol levels can actually transfer across the placenta,
And later through breast milk.
subtly altering the infant's own HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, wiring the baby to be more hypervigilant.
The mother's body is literally programming the infant's threat detection software based on the environment.
The biochemical bond also extends deeply into sensory imprinting. There is a landmark study cited from the University of Montreal regarding auditory recognition.
It's common knowledge that an infant recognizes its mother's voice, but the physiological response is what's critical here.
By monitoring infant brainwaves and hormone levels, researchers found that exposure to the mother's voice acts as a biological thermostat.
When an infant is stressed, hearing the mother's voice significantly and rapidly lowers the infant's circulating cortisol levels, far more effectively than the voice of a female stranger or even the father.
The mother's vocal frequencies literally act as a chemical regulatory mechanism for the baby's nervous system.
And the visual data is just as intense. A study from the University of Cambridge utilized dual EEG scans to monitor the brainwaves of a mother and infant simultaneously.
When the mother makes direct, prolonged eye contact with the baby, their brainwaves literally synchronize.
The mother's gaze is actively stimulating and wiring the prefrontal cortex of the infant's brain,
The area responsible for complex social interaction, empathy, and emotional regulation.
which brings us to a deeply uncomfortable but necessary part of the analysis, the deprivation void.
Yeah.
The author forces the reader to confront what happens to the human neurological system when this vital biochemical architecture is denied.
And the grim case study used is the horrific reality of the 1980s Romanian orphanages under the communist regime of Nicolae Ceausescu.
Due to extreme state mandates on reproduction, tens of thousands of children were institutionalized in stark, understaffed facilities.
They were left in cribs for 23 hours a day with almost zero human contact.
No maternal touch and no sensory stimulation.
The findings from the subsequent Bucharest Early Intervention Project, which tracked these children for decades, are just devastating to read.
It is one of the darkest chapters in modern developmental psychology. These children didn't merely suffer psychological trauma in the abstract sense, they suffered severe structural brain damage.
MRI scans revealed that the institutionalized children literally developed smaller brains.
They had significantly reduced gray matter and white matter tracts, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala.
The lack of a mother's touch, the absence of her regulating voice, the void of synchronized eye contact. It resulted in catastrophic synaptic pruning.
The brain literally disassembled its own potential because it lacked the biological input required to build it.
It empirically proves that maternal care is not an environmental luxury. It is a strict structural requirement for the physical development of the human brain.
It is a terrifying proof of concept, but the text contrasts that horror with an incredible story of medical innovation born out of pure desperation.
In the late 1970s, a Colombian doctor named Edgar Ray Sanabria was working in a hospital in Bogota facing a severe shortage of incubators for premature babies.
And the mortality rate was astronomical.
Out of sheer necessity, he instructed the mothers to strip down and hold their fragile, premature newborns bare, skin-to-bare skin against their chests, wrapping them together in a blanket.
This is the genesis of what we now universally call kangaroo care, and the physiological results astounded the medical community.
The mothers' bodies acted as highly intelligent, autonomous incubators.
A mother's chest temperature will actually fluctuate, rising if the baby is cold and lowering if the baby is too warm, a process called thermal synchrony.
Furthermore, the skin-to-skin contact stimulated the infant's vagal nerve, improving digestion and weight gain.
While the transfer of the mother's skin flora colonized the baby's microbiome, drastically reducing hospital-acquired infections.
The mother's physical body is, quite literally, the ultimate biologically calibrated life support system.
Which begs the question for you listening right now. If this biochemical synchrony is so incredibly delicate and hardwired by millions of years of brutal evolutionary trial and error, how is our current environment impacting it?
The book raises the issue of modern technological disruption. If a mother is constantly scrolling on a smartphone, emitting blue light and breaking that crucial eye contact while holding her infant,
What does that do to the synchronization of their brainwaves?
if eye contact builds the prefrontal cortex, what happens when that gaze is consistently intercepted by a screen?
It's a modern dilemma that the author suggests is slowly, invisibly eroding our biological foundations.
It forces a reevaluation of our relationship with our own biology in the digital age. But the text does not confine its analysis to neurobiology.
No, it transitions into how early human civilizations interpreted these brutal biological realities through the lens of mythology.
Ancient cultures deeply understood this primal biology, but lacking the language of endocrinology, they codified it into powerful, resonant mythological archetypes.
They fully grasped the terrifying duality of the Imago Mater, the eternal image of the mother.
They understood that the force that gives life is inextricably linked to the force that destroys it.
They certainly didn't view the mother figure through the sanitized, pastel, one-dimensional lens that modern consumer culture uses.
No, they recognized the awe-inspiring, often violent power of the maternal force.
The book points to the Hindu goddess Kali as the quintessential manifestation of the dark or fierce mother.
The iconography of Kali is intentionally terrifying. She is depicted with skin as black as the night, wielding a bloodied sword.
Wearing a garland of freshly severed human heads and a skirt made of dismembered human arms.
She is often shown standing on the chest of her husband, the god Shiva.
Yet, within the theology, she is deeply revered as a loving, fiercely protective mother figure.
The skulls and severed arms represent her destruction of the ego and the severing of ignorance and evil that threaten her devotees.
She destroys in order to preserve. Her violence is the absolute mechanism of her protection.
This archetype acknowledges that true maternal protection sometimes requires a terrifying capacity for destruction.
We see that same visceral duality across the globe in the Aztec pantheon with the goddess Coatlicue.
Her name literally translates to skirt of snakes. She's depicted wearing a necklace of human hearts and hands, and her head is formed by two facing serpents.
She represents the earth itself, both the fertile ground that gives birth to the crops and the ravenous grave that consumes the dead.
And Greek mythology is saturated with the dark potential of the maternal archetype.
The text analyzes the tragedies of Clytemnestra, who orchestrates the brutal murder of her husband Agamemnon as vengeance for him sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia to secure favorable winds for his fleet.
And then there is Medea, who commits the ultimate unimaginable horror of murdering her own children to punish her unfaithful husband Jason.
These myths aren't just entertaining stories, they are cultural warning systems.
They illustrate the dark, possessive, and violently destructive potential of the maternal archetype when it is inverted or pushed beyond the bounds of natural order.
What's fascinating here is how the author connects these ancient mythological warnings to modern psychoanalytic theory, specifically Carl Jung's concept of the terrible mother.
Right. In the Jungian framework, the terrible mother represents the shadow side of nurturing.
It is the archetype of protection mutated into suffocation.
When the biological drive to nurture becomes deeply neurotic, the mother no longer prepares the child for independence like the lioness does, but instead seeks to devour and absorb the child.
Preventing them from ever achieving autonomy.
You see this archetype everywhere in modern psychological horror. The book points out that films tap into this primal dread perfectly.
Think of Norma Bates in Psycho. A mother whose psychological grip on her son is so total, so suffocating, that he entirely subsumes her identity into his own.
Or the deeply manipulative, spiritually destructive mother figure in the movie Hereditary.
These narratives terrify us precisely because they subvert the core biological expectation of the Imago Mater.
They exploit our deepest anxiety about being consumed by the very entity designed to protect us.
But alongside the destroyer, the ancient world predominantly venerated the ultimate nurturer, the aspect of the archetype that sustains life and guides souls through the darkness.
The Egyptian goddess Isis is presented as a prime example of maternal restoration.
When her husband Osiris is murdered and dismembered by his brother Set, Isis relentlessly scours the earth to physically reassemble his body.
She then miraculously conceives and nurses their son Horus, protecting him in the papyrus swamps until he is strong enough to reclaim the throne.
She acts as both the ultimate life giver and the magical guide for the dead, navigating the perilous underworld.
We also see the sheer world-altering power of maternal grief in the Greek goddess Demeter.
When her daughter Persephone is abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld, Demeter's despair is so absolute that she ceases her duties as the goddess of agriculture.
She literally plunges the entire planet into a freezing, barren winter,
Starving humanity and threatening a cosmic order until Zeus is forced to intervene and return her child.
Her maternal love is a force powerful enough to hold the climate of the earth hostage.
The author meticulously tracks this veneration of fertility and life sustenance across drastically different geographies.
The Mayan goddess Ixchel, who governed midwifery, medicine, and lunar cycles.
The Roman goddess Ceres, the embodiment of the earth's agricultural bounty and the patron of plebeian laws.
The Native American corn mother, whose mythology often involves her literally sacrificing her own physical body.
Dragging her flesh across the earth so that life-sustaining corn could grow from the soil for her people.
And the text draws a direct, unbroken line from these ancient life and death fertility rites all the way to our modern, highly commercialized version of Mother's Day.
The bouquet of flowers you buy at the grocery store today is a distant, sanitized echo of the harvest offerings and blood sacrifices given to Ceres or Ixchel thousands of years ago.
The ritual has been diluted, but the underlying recognition of the life-giving force remains encoded in the culture.
This historical analysis lays the groundwork for the book's most contentious sociopolitical argument.
If the mother is this powerful primal archetype of creation and order, then she is, by definition, the foundational pillar of human civilization.
The text argues that the maternal archetype built and sustained human culture as we know it, acting as the primary institutional custodian of tradition before the ideological shifts of the 20th and 21st centuries.
The examples given of mothers as the keepers of tradition are quite profound. The book looks at the Jewish mother lighting the Shabbat candles on Friday evening.
This isn't just a quaint religious practice. It is the physical act of drawing a boundary between the profane work week and the sacred day of rest.
It is a spiritual inheritance, passed down matriarchally, that has sustained Jewish cultural identity through millennia of diaspora and persecution.
The mother literally kindles the light of the culture.
Similarly, the text examines the intricate, highly disciplined beauty of the Japanese tea ceremony.
Heavily influenced by Zen Buddhism and passed down through generations of women, it is a rigorous practice of mindfulness, aesthetics, and respect.
Furthermore, it highlights indigenous mothers around the world who serve as the living libraries of their communities.
Preserving ancient knowledge of botanical medicine, sustainable agriculture, and oral histories. They are the mortar holding the culture together.
But the author points out a stark, jarring contrast between these historical ideals and modern cultural representations.
The text contrasts the 1950s American cultural ideal, exemplified by characters like June Cleaver in Leave It to Beaver,
who represented the calm, perfectly composed, domestic center of gravity.
Right, contrasting that with the modern media trope of the frazzled, constantly overwhelmed supermom.
This modern archetype is depicted as constantly on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
Forced to seamlessly juggle a demanding 60-hour-a-week corporate career with the biological demands of raising a family, resulting in perpetual chaos and exhaustion.
And here is where we must impartially outline the author's central ideological critique, which forms the crux of his argument to his specific readership.
The book posits that traditional societal structures, where the mother was the revered, protected custodian of the home and the primary transmitter of culture, have been deliberately targeted and eroded by feminism and what the author terms cultural Marxism.
The argument presented is that these ideologies have successfully reframed the domestic sphere as a site of oppression rather than a site of fundamental societal architecture.
The thesis is that by pushing for total integration into the corporate economic machine, society has created an unnatural standard that fundamentally alienates women from what the author views as their sacred biological imperative.
According to this framework, the displacement of the mother from the center of the household was not a liberation, but a structural destabilization of the family unit.
Leaving children to be raised by institutional surrogates and the state.
Again, we are looking at the mechanics of this argument, how he connects the biology of the oxytocin bond we discussed earlier to his assertion that modern economic structures are biologically hostile to human flourishing.
It is a sweeping sociopolitical diagnosis. To further illustrate the consequences of this societal shift, the author explores the changing historical narrative surrounding the single mother.
Historically, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, single motherhood was heavily stigmatized.
The text notes that while modern society now frequently celebrates the incredible resilience of single mothers navigating urban poverty, working multiple low-wage jobs, and battling housing shortages, this resilience is born of tragedy.
The author argues that the sheer volume of single mothers is a symptom of a society that has failed to protect and prioritize the traditional family structure.
Ultimately, abandoning women to bear the crushing dual burden of economic provision and biological nurturing entirely alone.
Whether examining a single mother or a traditional nuclear family, the text repeatedly emphasizes that motherhood is fundamentally a form of fierce advocacy and relentless leadership.
It pushes back against the notion that nurturing is a passive or subservient trait.
Instead, it frames motherhood as an active, aggressive form of leadership driven by the brutal, ground-level necessity of survival, entirely divorced from abstract political theory.
The historical case studies provided to back this up are compelling. Look at the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955.
While Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are the internationally recognized faces of the movement, the book emphasizes the logistical reality on the ground.
The boycott was sustained by the Women's Political Council, spearheaded by Joanne Robinson, and a massive network of black mothers.
They were the ones mimeographing thousands of flyers in the middle of the night.
They organized the complex carpool systems. They walked miles to work in the blistering heat and pouring rain.
Their motivation wasn't purely academic political theory. They were fighting a grueling war of attrition to secure a safer, more dignified physical future for their children.
Another incredibly intense example the book analyzes is the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina.
During the brutal military dictatorship of the late 1970s and early 80s, an estimated 30,000 people, mostly young students and activists, were disappeared by the state.
Abducted, tortured, and murdered.
In a climate of absolute terror where political opposition meant certain death, it was the mothers who first broke the silence.
Wearing white headscarves made from their children's cloth diapers, they bravely marched into the public square facing the presidential palace week after week.
Demanding justice and answers for their missing children.
They faced down a murderous military junta armed with nothing but the absolute moral authority of a mother's grief.
The regime tried to dismiss them as las locas, the madwomen, but their relentless, visible presence eventually drew international condemnation and helped fracture the dictatorship's grip on power.
They became the ultimate, undeniable symbol of political resistance.
The book also details how this maternal vision scales up into broader societal leadership, specifically in healthcare and art.
The analysis of Florence Nightingale is fascinating. She is the founder of modern nursing. But the text frames her work during the Crimean War not just as medical innovation, but as maternal protection deployed at an industrial scale.
Nightingale utilized advanced statistics, literally inventing the coxcomb chart, to prove that more soldiers were dying from preventable diseases due to horrific hygiene than from battle wounds.
Her meticulous, sweeping sanitary reforms were an extension of a macro-maternal vision, a relentless drive to clean, heal, and protect the vulnerable.
Transitioning to art, the book deeply analyzes Dorothea Lange's iconic photograph, Migrant Mother, taken during the depths of the American Great Depression.
The subject of the photo, Florence Owens Thompson, is framed tightly, her face etched with profound worry and exhaustion.
While her children huddle against her, their faces turned away from the camera.
The author argues this image became the defining symbol of an entire era because it visually captured the absolute apex of the Imago Mater in crisis.
The immense crushing burden and the unyielding, immovable strength of the mother as the ultimate provider and shield against a collapsing world.
And to ground this in the modern economy, the author shares a contemporary anecdote about a prominent Silicon Valley tech developer.
This developer attributes his entire multi-million-dollar career solely to his mother's aggressive advocacy.
She recognized his early disruptive talent for dismantling household gadgets, something that got him in trouble at school, and fiercely advocated for him.
Fighting school administrators to get him into advanced engineering tracks.
It's a micro example of a macroeconomic truth the book pushes. Mothers shape the global economy.
They identify latent potential and relentlessly guide their children toward competence and success. Modern figures like Candace Lightfoot are cited as contemporary manifestations of this primal advocating force navigating modern institutional bureaucracies.
It forces a complete reframing of how we calculate economic value and leadership. But the author doesn't allow the reader to remain in the purely practical or historical realms.
No, the book elevates the entire discussion, moving from the microscopic neurochemistry of the brain to the macroscopic, cosmic, and spiritual dimensions.
It explores how the Imago Mater is conceptualized as being woven into the very mathematical and theological fabric of the universe.
This is where the text becomes intensely philosophical. It explores the theological concept of the mother as the literal bridge between the finite earthly realm and the infinite divine realm.
A significant portion of this section is dedicated to the early Christian concept of the Theotokos, a Greek term officially adopted at the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD.
Which translates to the God-bearer.
The book heavily contrasts the theology of the Virgin Mary with the narrative of Eve. The juxtaposition is foundational to Western spiritual architecture.
Eve represents pride, disobedience, and the severing of humanity from divine order, the mother of mortality.
Mary, conversely, represents profound humility, surrender, and the fiat, the let it be done.
By physically bearing the divine into the material world, she's presented as the ultimate redeeming maternal archetype, repairing the cosmic fracture caused by Eve.
You can physically see the weight of this theology in Renaissance art. The book spends time analyzing Raphael's Madonna della Seggiola.
The geometry of the painting is circular, emphasizing the fierce, protective, almost suffocating embrace of Mary holding the Christ child.
Staring directly at the viewer with a look of intense vigilance.
And then, of course, Michelangelo's Pietà. The author notes the brilliant theological choice Michelangelo made in carving Mary with a deeply youthful face, despite holding her 33-year-old crucified son.
It captures the eternal, timeless nature of maternal sorrow, the ultimate agony of the Imago Mater holding the sacrificed child.
It is visual theology communicating the sacred, terrible weight of motherhood in a way text cannot achieve.
The analysis broadens to incorporate Eastern spiritual traditions, demonstrating the global universality of the archetype. In Hinduism, the text examines Parvati, particularly her union with Shiva.
Within the framework of Advaita Vedanta, or non-duality, their union represents the perfect, necessary integration of cosmic opposites.
The masculine and the feminine, the unmanifested consciousness, and the manifested kinetic energy of the universe.
Parvati demonstrates that true spiritual power lies in the integration of these forces, not their separation.
Similarly, the book highlights Guanyin, the Buddhist bodhisattva of compassion.
Guanyin is the embodiment of the maternal archetype elevated to a state of pure, boundless mercy.
Hearing the cries of all suffering beings in the world and delaying her own enlightenment to comfort them.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The author takes all of this, the biology of oxytocin, the history of the single mother, the theology of the Theotokos, and attempts to unify it using the CTMU theory.
That stands for the cognitive theoretic model of the universe, a highly complex, controversial theory developed by Christopher Langan.
To simplify a very dense concept, the CTMU argues that the universe is not just dead matter extending outward, it is a self-simulating, self-referential system.
It functions like a cosmic mind. It essentially argues that reality is a tautology. It is generated by its own internal logic and syntax.
It is the universe processing information to understand itself.
The author of Imago Mater appropriates this physics framework and applies it to biology. He argues that the mother-child bond is a perfect biological fractal of this cosmic process.
If the universe is a system passing down information to simulate its own existence, then the mother teaching the child, wiring its prefrontal cortex through eye contact and passing down cultural syntax, is literally the universe sustaining its own existence and meaning at the microscopic level.
The mother is the mechanism by which reality prevents itself from dissolving into entropy.
It's an incredibly dizzying, high-altitude concept,
Yeah.
framing the mother not just as a biological parent, but as a structural necessity for the laws of physics and reality to continue making sense.
But the author knows you can't just leave the reader floating in the theoretical cosmos. He brings the narrative crashing violently back down to Earth, specifically to the turbulent realities of the 21st century.
The final section examines how this eternal cosmic archetype is desperately adapting to modern existential crises.
The core question is, how does the biological programming of the Imago Mater function in an age characterized by rapid, unprecedented ecological, economic, and technological chaos?
The text points to the front lines of climate change in Bangladesh. With rising sea levels and increasingly severe monsoon flooding, the environment has become lethally hostile.
In response, mothers are fundamentally altering their survival strategies.
Organizing mass community efforts to teach young children how to swim as a baseline survival skill before they even learn to read.
They are physically adapting their lineage's skill set to a morphing environment.
The book sharply contrasts that localized physical adaptation with the slow-motion demographic collapse occurring in Japan.
Due to crushing corporate work cultures, economic stagnation, and shifting social expectations, Japan has seen a massive rise in what are termed parasite singles.
Or hikikomori. Adults who live with their parents indefinitely, avoiding marriage, relationships, and parenthood entirely.
The author interprets this not just as an economic quirk, but as a profound, catastrophic breakdown of the Imago Mater cycle.
The biological imperative has been overridden by sociological despair.
Yet we see the archetype manifesting with incredible intensity during acute global crises. The book analyzes the initial terrifying wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in Italy.
When state infrastructure buckled, it was the informal networks of Italian mothers who organized block-by-block mutual aid.
Community kitchens and elder care check-ins, ensuring the social fabric didn't entirely disintegrate.
Similarly, in the catastrophic rubble of the Syrian civil war, the text documents how mothers navigate active, shifting war zones daily.
Calculating sniper trajectories and mortar patterns just to secure black market flour or find underground schooling for their children.
And in Ukraine, the archetype adapts again, with mothers taking up assault rifles to serve as frontline soldiers and combat medics.
The biological drive to protect the child expands into the absolute defense of the sovereign soil the child stands on.
The text also explores how this primal drive is emerging in entirely new, modern social configurations. It briefly examines the LGBTQ+ community, specifically the phenomenon of chosen families.
When biological families fracture due to rejection, the author notes that new networks spontaneously form, and within them, older members almost inevitably step into the maternal role.
They provide the housing, the emotional regulation, the guidance, and the fierce protection that the archetype strictly demands.
Proving the role is a structural necessity for human group survival, regardless of the biological origins of the group.
The analysis also touches on the immense, often crushing psychological pressure on Chinese mothers today.
They are caught in a brutal cultural crossfire, attempting to blend rigorous traditional Eastern expectations of filial piety and academic perfection with Western parenting styles that emphasize emotional individuality.
All of this is happening within a hyper-competitive, slowing global economy. It's a double-edged sword of immense pressure that is testing the limits of maternal endurance.
And finally, the book returns to the intersection of motherhood and cutting-edge technology, raising profound ethical questions about our growing reliance on algorithms.
We are now seeing the widespread adoption of AI-driven baby monitors, like the Owlet Smart Sock, which track an infant's blood oxygen levels, heart rate, and sleep cycles, feeding that data into an algorithmic dashboard.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, and it is the crux of the book's modern warning.
When a mother outsources her primal vigilance, the very vigilance that wires her own brain and regulates her infant's cortisol, to a silicon chip and a smartphone app, what is lost?
Are we eroding the biological tether? How do you see the women in your own lives navigating these intense, contradictory modern pressures?
How do they balance an ancient, hardwired biological drive to nurture with the relentless demands of a digitized, economically strained, and increasingly isolated world?
It is a massive, incredibly heavy question to end on.
And it brings us to the conclusion of what has been an absolutely colossal deep dive. We have unpacked the structural arguments of Conrad Riker's Imago Mater from every conceivable angle.
We started with the brutal, calculated logic of mammalian evolution, the social currency of chimps, the evolutionary math of the lioness, and the haunting cellular sacrifice of the mother octopus.
We dove deep into the neurochemistry of the infant brain, the critical importance of oxytocin and eye contact, and the terrifying void of the Romanian orphanages.
We explored the complex dualities of ancient mythology, the mother's historical role as the fierce institutional custodian of culture, and her relentless world-shaping advocacy in the face of tyranny.
Finally, we scaled the theoretical heights of the CTMU before confronting the harsh technological realities of the 21st century.
The book provides a sweeping, provocative framework designed to help you understand the foundational roots of the institutions we rely on today, and why the author believes they are currently fracturing.
It is undeniably a text that demands intense critical engagement. Regardless of where you stand on his socio-political conclusions regarding feminism or the structure of the modern economy.
The sheer volume of biological data, historical case studies, and mythological analysis he presents offers a profound, challenging lens through which to view the absolutely foundational role of motherhood in the survival of the human species.
Absolutely. It gives you the raw material to analyze the world around you. As a reminder, this deep dive was a comprehensive, critical review of Conrad Riker's incredibly dense ebook, Imago Mater.
If you found this breakdown valuable, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.
Head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy your own copy of Imago Mater and dive into the data yourself.
And be sure to follow @Conrad Riker on Substack for more of his incisive, challenging content.
To leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over today, building directly on the implications of Riker's work. If maternal pair is not just a nice idea, but a fiercely hardwired biological and cosmic imperative, honed over millions of years of brutal, unforgiving evolution,
What will actually happen to human consciousness as we move rapidly toward the technological singularity?
if we eventually attempt to fully outsource the Imago Mater, giving the psychological and physical development of our children over to artificial intelligence, algorithmic nannies, and perfectly optimized automated care systems.
Will that finally allow us to transcend our messy biology to become something entirely new?
Or will we permanently sever the exact neurochemical tether that keeps us fundamentally recognizably human? Think about that. See you next time.